Rain lashed against the cracked windshield of the Jeep as Elias Thorne navigated the treacherous, winding roads of the Smoky Mountains in the dead of night. He was 36, a former Marine whose broad shoulders carried the invisible, crushing weight of a war he had left behind, but could never truly escape. The coastal base was a memory now, replaced by the isolating silence of his late father's weathered Appalachian log cabin, hidden deep within the dense pine forest. Elias gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his gray-green eyes staring blankly into the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers slicing through the torrential Appalachian downpour. Thunder rattled the chassis of his vehicle, sounding too much like the distant artillery strikes that still haunted his restless, sweat-drenched nights back in the civilian world. He had come to these misty mountains seeking peace, but the quiet only amplified the ghosts of his fallen squad mates echoing loudly in his fractured mind. Suddenly, the Jeep's headlights caught a faint, hunched silhouette, trembling violently on the muddy shoulder of the desolate, storm-battered mountain highway. Elias slammed on the brakes, his military instincts flaring as the vehicle skidded to a halt mere feet from the mysterious, shivering figure shrouded in darkness. It was a purebred German shepherd, soaked to the bone, her matted black and tan fur clinging desperately to a starving, rib-protruding frame. She did not run or cower from the glaring headlights. Instead, she stood her ground with a weary, warrior-like defiance that struck Elias right in the chest. Elias stepped out into the biting cold, the freezing rain stinging his rugged face, as he slowly approached the wounded animal with his hands raised defensively. Up close, he noticed the missing notch in her left ear and the deep, jagged scar tracing along her right flank, marks of a brutal, unforgiving past. "Easy there, soldier," Elias murmured over the howling wind, recognizing the unmistakable posture of a highly trained canine unit pushed to the absolute brink of death. Valkyrie's amber eyes met his, reflecting not feral panic, but a profound, desperate trust, as she suddenly swayed and collapsed heavily against his mud-stained combat boots. He dropped to his knees in the freezing mud, instinctively wrapping his thick canvas jacket around her trembling body to preserve whatever fading warmth she had left. Just as he gathered her into his arms, a faint, high-pitched whimper pierced through the roaring thunder, freezing the hardened veteran perfectly in his tracks. The sound emanated from a flooded roadside ditch, drawing Valkyrie's exhausted gaze and prompting a weak, heartbreaking whine from deep within her bruised chest. Snatching his tactical flashlight, Elias swept the beam across the muddy embankment, revealing a soggy cardboard box, partially shielded by a piece of rotting, splintered plywood. Inside the ruined box squirmed 3 tiny, blind puppies, crying out for the mother who had dragged her broken body to the highway just to save them. "Never leave a comrade behind," Elias whispered fiercely into the storm, gathering the fragile family into his arms before turning back toward the idling, warm Jeep. Elias placed the shivering mother and her newborn pups onto the passenger seat, cranking the Jeep's heater to its absolute maximum to fight off the biting Appalachian chill. He slammed the heavy metal door shut, the resounding thud swallowed instantly by the roaring mountain storm as he threw the vehicle into gear. The treacherous descent towards civilization was a blur of slick asphalt, blinding rain, and the ghostly silhouettes of towering pines bending under the gale-force winds. Every few seconds, Elias's anxious gray-green eyes darted to the passenger seat, watching Valkyrie curl her bruised, exhausted body protectively around the squirming cardboard box. She was fading fast, her ragged breathing barely audible over the heater's roar. Yet her amber eyes never strayed from the fragile lives she had fought so hard to save. "Hold on, Valkyrie," Elias urged, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the devastating ambush in the dusty valleys of Kunar province. For the first time in years, the hardened veteran wasn't just running away from his ghosts. He was racing toward a desperate, fragile glimmer of hope. After 20 agonizing minutes, the neon green glow of the Foster Veterinary Clinic flickered through the torrential downpour like a solitary lighthouse in a raging sea. Elias skidded the Jeep into the flooded gravel lot, killing the engine before throwing his door open to the merciless, freezing rain. He gathered the whimpering puppies and the limp, heavy form of the German shepherd into his arms, kicking the clinic's glass door open with his mud-caked combat boot. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the sterile, white-tiled waiting room where Dr. Clara Vance stood behind the reception counter, reviewing a stack of medical charts. Clara was 42, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, her face carrying the quiet, compassionate exhaustion of a woman who spent her life saving the helpless. "We need help," Elias barked, his authoritative military cadence cutting through the quiet hum of the clinic as rainwater pooled around his heavy leather boots. Clara's eyes widened at the sight of the soaked veteran cradling the dying dog and the box of puppies, and she instantly pointed toward the back examination room. "Bring them in here, now," she commanded, her voice steady and professional as she quickly cleared the stainless steel examination table of its sterile instruments. Elias laid Valkyrie down gently. Her legs gave out instantly, her head hitting the cold metal table with a dull, heartbreaking thud that echoed in the quiet room. Clara's hands moved with practiced precision, quickly wrapping the dog in thermal blankets, while simultaneously checking the vital signs of the three freezing, squirming pups. "She's severely hypothermic, malnourished, and in shock," Clara murmured, her brow furrowing as she noticed the deep, jagged scars hidden beneath the dog's matted fur. When one of the tiny pups let out a desperate cry, Valkyrie weakly attempted to lift her heavy head, her maternal instincts fighting a losing battle against her failing body. Easy, Mama, I've got them," Clara whispered softly, pressing a gentle hand against the dog's chest, while Elias stood frozen in the background, his heart hammering against his ribs. Clara moved swiftly to the whimpering cardboard box, carefully transferring the three shivering, blind puppies into a warm, brightly lit neonatal incubator. The sterile hum of the medical machine offered a stark contrast to the violent Appalachian storm still battering the clinic's reinforced glass windows. Elias stood rigidly in the corner of the room, a puddle of muddy rainwater forming beneath his heavy combat boots as he watched silently. "They'll make it, but their mother is running on borrowed time," Clara stated grimly, turning her urgent attention back to the battered German Shepherd. She grabbed a clear IV bag and expertly located a vein in Valkyrie's bruised foreleg, securing the line with quick, precise wraps of tape. As Clara shaved a small patch of matted fur to monitor the dog's fractured ribcage, she noticed a faded, alphanumeric military tattoo inside her ear. "She's not a stray," Clara murmured, tracing the faded ink with a gloved finger before reaching for a handheld microchip scanner on the counter. The device beeped sharply, displaying a string of classified, highly redacted data that confirmed Valkyrie was a highly trained, registered military working dog, assigned to a sergeant. "The rest of the file is completely corrupted," Clara read aloud, her compassionate eyes lifting to meet Elias's intense gaze. "She was left behind in the field," Elias replied, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of survivor's guilt. Clara paused briefly, observing the silver streaks in Elias's dark hair and the rigid, disciplined posture that screamed of years spent in uniform. "You understand what she's going through right now, don't you?" Clara asked gently, recognizing the tragic kinship shared between the soldier and the K9. Before Elias could answer, Valkyrie let out a strained, panicked gasp, her amber eyes snapping wide open as the powerful pain medication took effect. She thrashed weakly on the cold stainless steel, her jaws snapping at the empty air in a blind, terrified attempt to protect her puppies. "Hold her down, she's going to hurt herself," Clara warned urgently, quickly stepping back to avoid the injured dog's dangerous, thrashing limbs. But Elias didn't restrain her. Instead, he stepped forward, placing a large, calloused hand gently against the trembling side of Valkyrie's bruised neck. "Stand down, soldier, you're safe now," Elias commanded softly, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the dog's traumatic panic like a lighthouse through fog. Miraculously, Valkyrie stopped thrashing instantly, her heavy breathing slowing as she leaned her weary head into the undeniable safety of the veteran's warm palm. Clara let out a breathless sigh of disbelief, watching the hardened K9 surrender her fierce defenses to a man she had met hours ago. "I'll sign whatever foster paperwork you need," Elias declared without hesitation, his grey-green eyes locked onto the dog as the storm finally began to break. The violent mountain storm finally broke at dawn, giving way to a pale, hesitant sunlight that crept slowly through the clinic's horizontal vinyl blinds. Elias had not slept a single wink, spending the entire night seated in a hard plastic chair with his calloused hand resting near Valkyrie's bandaged leg. Dr. Clara Vance entered the quiet, sterile room carrying 2 steaming paper cups of black coffee, noting the veteran's exhausted but unyielding, silent vigil. "Her fever broke around 4 this morning, and the puppies are finally stabilizing in the incubator," Clara whispered gently, handing the warm cup to the weary soldier. "She kept watching the door all night long," Elias murmured, his grey-green eyes fixed intently on the sleeping German shepherd's slow, rhythmic breathing. "She's waiting for her handler to walk through it," Clara replied softly, her professional demeanor softening as she leaned casually against the stainless steel examination table. Elias closed his eyes tightly, the traumatic memory of his own fallen brothers crashing over him like a suffocating wave of inescapable survivor's guilt. "I led my squad into a heavily fortified ambush in the Karengal Valley," Elias confessed, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of a decade's utter silence. "3 good men never came home because of my orders, and I've spent every single day since wishing I was buried right beside them in the dirt." Clara didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. Instead, she placed a comforting hand on his broad shoulder, silently acknowledging the heavy, invisible burden of his service. "You cannot change the past, Elias, but you saved 4 innocent lives last night," Clara stated firmly, nodding toward the sleeping dog and the glowing neonatal incubator. Valkyrie stirred slightly at the sound of his deep voice, her amber eyes opening slowly as she weakly nudged her wet nose against Elias's calloused palm. By mid-afternoon, Elias had carefully loaded the recovering German Shepherd and her 3 tiny pups into the heated cab of his rugged, mud-splattered Jeep. The drive back up the treacherous Appalachian Mountain Road was bathed in golden sunlight, the previously terrifying landscape now offering a quiet, breathtaking natural beauty. He pulled up to his late father's secluded log cabin, its dark cedar planks and sagging wooden porch looking much more welcoming in the warm afternoon light. Elias carried Valkyrie inside the house first, gently laying her down onto a thick, folded army blanket positioned perfectly in front of the grand cobblestone fireplace. Next, he brought in the squirming puppies, placing them safely against their mother's warm belly as she immediately began cleaning them with devoted, maternal affection. The old mountain cabin smelled heavily of ancient pine and wood smoke, a deeply nostalgic scent that finally began to thaw the thick ice around Elias's hardened heart. He knelt on the dusty wooden floorboards, pulling a weathered silver harmonica from his pocket and gently wiping the metal clean with his charcoal shirt. "Welcome home, soldier," Elias whispered to the exhausted dog, striking a long wooden match to light the hearth as the first sparks of genuine healing ignited within him. For the next 3 weeks, the isolated Appalachian cabin transformed from a silent tomb of bitter memories into a warm, bustling sanctuary of unexpected life. Elias established a rigorous daily routine, chopping firewood at dawn, while Valkyrie watched his every move with unwavering loyalty from the safety of the sagging wooden porch. Her fractured leg healed steadily under his meticulous, gentle care, her thick black and tan coat finally regaining its natural, healthy luster in the crisp mountain sun. The 3 puppies, no longer fragile and blind, tumbled playfully across the dusty cedar floorboards, their joyful yips filling the previously hollow, silent living space. Elias named the boldest pup Justice, the quiet observer Liberty, and the relentless explorer Ranger, honoring the core American values he had once sworn to protect. Every evening after feeding them, Elias sat by the roaring cobblestone fireplace, playing slow, haunting melodies on his silver harmonica as the dogs slept peacefully nearby. Valkyrie no longer flinched when he reached out to stroke her nicked ear. Instead, she leaned her heavy head into his calloused palm with absolute, unconditional trust. They had forged a profound, wordless understanding. 2 wounded warriors, finding their way back from the dark abyss through the quiet, steady strength of each other. But the tranquil mountain peace was abruptly shattered one freezing Tuesday evening when a sleek, unmarked black SUV slowly crunched up the long gravel driveway. Valkyrie immediately shot up from the warm hearth, her hackles raising defensively as a low, guttural growl vibrated violently deep within her broad, muscular chest. Elias instinctively reached for the heavy hunting rifle mounted above the wooden mantel, his gray-green eyes hardening as he peered cautiously through the dusty window pane. A tall man in a tailored charcoal overcoat stepped out of the vehicle, his rigid posture radiating the cold, calculating authority of federal law enforcement. Elias stepped out onto the sagging porch, his tan canvas jacket zipped tight against the mountain chill, keeping the hunting rifle casually but firmly angled downward. "Elias Thorne," the stranger announced, flashing a silver federal badge before his sharp, assessing eyes locked onto the snarling German Shepherd standing fiercely by Elias's side. "I am Agent Nolan, and I am here because that K9 contains highly classified, encrypted intel from a botched overseas extraction mission." Elias's jaw tightened dangerously as he took a deliberate step forward, his broad shoulders creating an impenetrable physical barrier between the federal agent and Valkyrie. "She isn't property. She's a retired soldier who was abandoned in the field by the very people you represent," Elias growled, his deep voice laced with venom. Agent Nolan sighed heavily, his breath pluming in the freezing Appalachian air, as he warned Elias that rogue mercenaries had tracked the dog's microchip signal. They are coming for her tonight, Thorne, and they will absolutely kill anyone who stands in their way to retrieve that encrypted data. Nolan handed Elias a prepaid burner phone and turned back to his idling SUV, leaving the hardened veteran and his loyal K9 to prepare for an inevitable war. As the red taillights of the federal SUV faded into the freezing Appalachian mist, a deafening, heavy silence descended upon the isolated mountain cabin. Elias didn't waste a single second. He immediately bolted the heavy oak door and dragged a solid ironwood bookshelf across the main entryway to barricade it. The hardened veteran moved with lethal, calculated precision, blowing out the glowing kerosene lanterns to plunge the entire cabin into absolute, tactical darkness. Only the dying, blood-red embers of the cobblestone fireplace provided any illumination, casting long, dancing shadows against the rustic cedar plank walls. He carefully ushered the 3 whimpering puppies into the sturdy, cast-iron woodbox near the hearth, throwing a thick wool blanket over them for protection. "Stay. Hold," Elias commanded softly, using the exact, sharp military hand signals he knew a highly trained K9 would instantly recognize and respect. Valkyrie understood immediately. She dropped into a low, defensive crouch in front of the woodbox, her amber eyes burning with a fierce, maternal protectiveness. Elias checked the action on his scoped hunting rifle, the metallic clack of the bolt echoing loudly in the tense, suffocating quiet of the room. He slipped a heavy tactical combat knife into his leather boot, his heart pounding a familiar, adrenaline-fueled rhythm against his bruised ribs. The temperature plummeted as midnight approached, the howling mountain wind violently rattling the cabin's frosted windowpanes like a chorus of angry ghosts. Then, the wind abruptly died, replaced by a sound that made the hair on the back of Elias's neck stand straight up, the crunch of snow under tactical boots. Valkyrie's ears swiveled like radar dishes, her scarred muzzle pointing directly toward the reinforced back door as a barely audible scraping sound echoed outside. Elias silently raised the heavy hunting rifle to his broad shoulder, peering through the high-powered scope into the freezing, pitch-black forest treeline. Through the frosted glass, he spotted 4 distinct, heavily armed figures, moving with fluid, professional synchronization through the dense Appalachian pines. These weren't amateur thugs. They were highly trained, ruthless mercenaries clad in black tactical gear and armed with suppressed automatic weapons. "They're flanking the perimeter," Elias whispered to the darkness, his military instincts calculating the exact trajectory of their imminent, deadly assault. Suddenly, a blinding flashbang grenade crashed violently through the front window, exploding with a deafening, ear-splitting concussion of white light and thunder. Elias threw his arms up to shield his eyes, the violent shockwave throwing him backward against the heavy wooden dining table with bone-jarring force. In the chaotic, ringing aftermath of the explosion, the heavy oak front door was kicked off its hinges, splintering violently into 1,000 jagged pieces. 2 masked mercenaries stormed into the smoke-filled living room, their green laser sights cutting through the dust, utterly unaware of the furious apex predator waiting in the shadows. The first mercenary stepped cautiously forward, his bright green laser sweeping dangerously close to the cast-iron woodbox where the hidden puppies whimpered softly. Without a single sound, Valkyrie launched herself from the pitch-black shadows like a guided missile made of pure muscle and maternal fury. She struck the lead mercenary squarely in the chest, her heavy 70-pound frame hitting him with the devastating, unstoppable force of a freight train. The man's suppressed rifle clattered uselessly to the wooden floorboards, as Valkyrie's powerful jaws locked viciously onto his thick, armored tactical forearm. The second intruder panicked, wildly swinging his weapon toward the snarling German shepherd, but Elias was already moving rapidly through the blinding smoke. Shaking off the concussive blast, the hardened veteran lunged forward, driving his broad shoulder directly into the second mercenary's Kevlar-plated midsection. They crashed violently through the splintered remains of the oak dining table, becoming a chaotic, brutal tangle of desperate limbs and black tactical gear. Elias expertly deflected the barrel of the automatic rifle just as the mercenary pulled the trigger, sending a spray of suppressed bullets harmlessly into the ceiling. With brutal, practiced military efficiency, Elias drew the heavy combat knife from his boot, driving the solid steel hilt sharply into his attacker's masked temple. The mercenary went completely limp, sliding unconsciously to the dusty floor, as Elias instantly pivoted his attention back toward the chaotic, smoke-filled entryway. Valkyrie was still fiercely engaged, violently shaking her head as she dragged the terrified, screaming lead intruder backward away from her hidden puppies. Valkyrie, release. Elias commanded sharply, his authoritative, booming voice easily cutting through the deafening chaos of the destroyed living room. The highly disciplined K9 instantly let go, stepping back but maintaining a terrifying, blood-chilling snarl directed squarely at the bleeding, defeated mercenary. Elias stepped over the broken furniture, pressing the cold steel barrel of his scoped hunting rifle directly against the terrified intruder's tactical helmet. "Tell whoever sent you that this dog is officially deceased," Elias growled, his grey-green eyes burning with a lethal, absolutely unyielding promise. Before the trembling man could even respond, the unmistakable, piercing wail of approaching police sirens echoed faintly through the freezing Appalachian Mountain Valley. Agent Nolan had apparently broken federal protocol, calling in local law enforcement to secure the perimeter before the rogue extraction team could successfully vanish. The remaining mercenaries outside heard the approaching sirens and immediately aborted the botched mission, their heavy boots crunching rapidly away into the dark pine forest. The bleeding intruder scrambled frantically to his feet, stumbling blindly out the shattered doorway into the freezing snow to join his retreating squad. Elias lowered his heavy rifle slowly, his broad chest heaving with adrenaline as he turned to look at the fierce, loyal canine standing proudly before him. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the splintered remains of the Appalachian log cabin as the local sheriff's deputies finally secured the snowy, chaotic perimeter. Elias dropped to his knees amidst the shattered glass, pulling the heavy wool blanket back to reveal the three terrified, but completely unharmed German Shepherd puppies. Valkyrie immediately began nuzzling her tiny pups, her fierce, blood-chilling warrior demeanor melting instantly back into gentle, devoted maternal affection. The local sheriff, a rugged man with a thick southern drawl, took Elias's statement, officially recording the violent mercenary intrusion as a clear-cut case of self-defense. "You and that dog are incredibly lucky to be breathing, Thorne," the sheriff muttered, shaking his head at the sheer, unimaginable destruction inside the rustic living room. "Luck had absolutely nothing to do with it," Elias replied quietly, resting a deeply affectionate, calloused hand on Valkyrie's broad, muscular shoulder. The bitter Appalachian winter eventually surrendered to a vibrant, blooming spring, replacing the freezing snow with a lush canopy of vivid emerald pine needles. The mountain cabin had been painstakingly repaired, the heavy oak door replaced, and the shattered windows completely restored to their former rustic glory. One crisp Tuesday morning, a dark green military-issue sedan crunched slowly up the gravel driveway, parking neatly beside Elias's mud-splattered Jeep. A distinguished man in his late 60s stepped out, wearing a crisp, decorated Marine Corps uniform that radiated a heavy, undeniable aura of grief and authority. "Elias Thorne?" the older man asked, removing his white officer's cover to reveal short, silver hair and eyes that held the exact same weariness as the veteran's. "I am Colonel James Miller. Agent Nolan told me where I could finally find the K9 that belonged to my late son, Sergeant Jackson Miller." Elias nodded respectfully, wiping the sawdust from his tan canvas jacket, before leading the grieving father toward the sunlit, sagging wooden porch. Valkyrie was resting in the warm sunlight, but as the colonel approached, she immediately stood up, her nicked ear twitching with sudden, intense recognition. She didn't bark. Instead, she walked slowly toward the older man, her amber eyes searching his weathered face, before gently pressing her head against his decorated chest. Colonel Miller's rigid military posture completely shattered, his hands trembling violently as he buried his face into the dog's thick black and tan neck. "You stayed with him, didn't you, girl?" The colonel choked out, tears streaming freely down his weathered cheeks as he embraced the last living piece of his beloved son. Elias watched the heartbreaking reunion from the doorway, his own grey-green eyes misting over as he finally understood the true, profound depth of Valkyrie's loyalty. After a long, emotional silence, the colonel reached into his uniform pocket and produced a tarnished silver military dog tag hanging from a thin olive-drab paracord. "Jax would want her to have this," Miller whispered, carefully tying the silver tags around Valkyrie's neck to honor the sacred, unbreakable bond they shared. By the time the blazing Appalachian summer rolled over the misty peaks, the once isolated log cabin had transformed completely into a bustling, vibrant sanctuary of hope. A freshly carved wooden sign hung proudly over the reinforced front gate, its deeply burned letters reading, "Valkyrie's Haven, a refuge for forgotten heroes." Elias had dedicated his entire life to rescuing abandoned military and police K9s, offering the broken, forgotten dogs a safe place to heal and find purpose. The heavy, suffocating silence of his past was entirely replaced by the joyful sounds of barking dogs, swinging hammers, and the genuine laughter of local veterans. Valkyrie's 3 puppies had grown into sleek, powerful young German shepherds, their black and tan coats shining brilliantly as they bounded across the lush green grass. Justice and Liberty possessed incredibly gentle temperaments, making them absolutely perfect candidates for specialized emotional therapy work with severely traumatized local children. Ranger, however, inherited his mother's fierce, protective instincts, sticking to Elias like a shadow as they trained together under the warm Tennessee sun. Valkyrie, wearing the silver military dog tag proudly against her chest, watched over the sprawling property from the sagging wooden porch like a regal, undisputed queen. One golden afternoon, the familiar crunch of tires signaled the arrival of Dr. Clara Vance, stepping out of her vehicle carrying a worn leather medical bag. If it isn't my absolute favorite Marine and his elite 4-legged platoon, Clara teased warmly, her bright smile instantly lighting up the dusty, sunlit training yard. Elias grinned, a genuine, completely unburdened smile that finally reached his grey-green eyes as he wiped the sweat from his brow with a dusty towel. Ranger bounded eagerly toward the veterinarian, his tail wagging furiously, as Clara crouched down to scratch affectionately behind his large, upright ears. "You have performed an absolute miracle out here, Elias," Clara murmured, looking past the dogs to the newly framed wooden therapy pavilion overlooking the misty valley. "I didn't build anything special, Clara. I just gave these forgotten warriors a place to stand," Elias replied humbly, leaning casually against the wooden fence. Nearby, a young combat veteran missing his right leg sat in a wheelchair, his face lighting up with pure joy as he practiced basic commands with Liberty. "You turned your deepest grief into something that actively heals others, Elias, and very few men have the sheer strength to do that," Clara noted softly. Elias looked deeply into Clara's compassionate eyes, the invisible, crushing weight of his survivor's guilt finally, completely lifting from his broad, weary shoulders. "Valkyrie gave me a profound reason to wake up every single morning, so I figured these dogs could do the exact same for others," Elias confessed quietly. As the afternoon sun began to dip behind the towering pines, the warm summer air filled with the comforting smell of a community barbecue and pine smoke. The haunting ghosts of the Koringol Valley no longer haunted Elias Thorne. They had been peacefully laid to rest, honored by the vibrant life thriving around him. As the golden sunset painted the Appalachian sky in strokes of brilliant fire, the local community gathered closely around the newly built cedar pavilion. The town sheriff, standing tall in his pressed tan uniform, raised a simple glass of iced tea to toast the extraordinary sanctuary and its founder. "To Elias Thorne, and to the silent, fiercely loyal guardians who stand bravely beside us in our darkest hours," the sheriff declared, his deep voice echoing across the misty valley. A heartfelt chorus of "Hear, hear" rose from the assembled crowd of veterans, volunteers, and grateful neighbors, their faces glowing warmly in the fading twilight. Elias accepted the community's profound gratitude with a quiet, humble nod, his rough hand resting instinctively on Valkyrie's broad, muscular head. The majestic K9 sat proudly at his side, the silver military dog tag glinting beautifully against her dark chest as she surveyed the peaceful, joyous gathering. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the mountain air turned crisp, Elias and Valkyrie walked alone down to the misty edge of the tranquil lake. The moon cast a brilliant, shimmering silver path across the rippling water, completely mirroring the deep, hard-won peace that now resided in the veteran's soul. Ranger, Justice, and Liberty playfully chased each other along the shoreline, their joyful, splashing footsteps breaking the pristine silence of the mountain night. Elias crouched down in the wet grass, pulling Valkyrie close as he stared deeply into her intelligent, intensely loyal amber eyes. "When I found you freezing on that dark mountain road, I honestly thought you were the one who desperately needed saving," Elias whispered, his voice thick with raw emotion. Valkyrie leaned her heavy head against his broad chest, letting out a long, contented sigh that vibrated deeply through his canvas jacket. "But I was wrong, soldier," Elias continued, a single, grateful tear finally escaping his grey-green eyes to trace a line down his rugged cheek. "You saved me first." The fierce German shepherd gently licked the tear from his face, her unconditional love permanently sealing the invisible, sacred bond forged in the fires of their shared trauma. Together, the man and the dog sat in the serene, moonlit quiet, two forgotten warriors who had miraculously transformed their profound grief into an enduring, life-saving legacy. They were no longer a shattered soldier and a broken service dog. They were a true family, steadfast keepers of a promise carved into the soul of the mountains. The newly carved sign swaying gently at the entrance of the sanctuary served as a permanent, unshakable testament to their incredible journey of redemption. In the quiet aftermath of every violent storm, a profound, everyday miracle patiently waits for those courageous enough to stop, look, and refuse to walk away. Because whether on a blood-stained battlefield overseas or a freezing, rain-swept Appalachian highway, the most sacred vow of the American spirit remains eternally true. You never, ever leave a fallen comrade behind in the dark, no matter the cost, the danger, or the fierce raging of the unforgiving storm. In the darkest corners of our lives, when the deafening echoes of past battles threaten to pull us under, salvation rarely comes easy. Sometimes, it arrives on a storm-battered mountain road, shivering, scarred, and desperate for a lifeline. The extraordinary bond between a wounded veteran and a forgotten canine hero teaches us a profound truth. Rescue is never a one-way street. We often believe that the strong are simply meant to save the weak. Yet, when we reach into the freezing rain to pull a broken soul from the brink, we are inevitably pulling ourselves back into the light. These silent, four-legged warriors give us their absolute all on the battlefield, absorbing our trauma and standing as the ultimate shield. They deserve nothing less than our unwavering devotion when the guns finally fall silent. True healing doesn't mean erasing the scars. It means finding a new, life-saving mission together. By opening our hearts to the forgotten and defending the defenseless, we reclaim our own humanity. Let their fierce, unconditional love be our guiding light out of the shadows. Remember the most sacred, unbreakable vow of the human spirit. We never, ever leave a comrade behind,